It was a sunny morning at an international airport where travelers crowded around check-in counters, eager to begin their journeys. The air was filled with the sound of announcements through the speakers and hurried footsteps on the smooth tiled floor. Travelers discussed their destinations, their flight schedules, their hopes and their apprehensions. The atmosphere was lively, noisy, but also exciting, like a promise of new adventures. Among those passengers was Malik, a 16-year-old black boy, dressed in a simple gray sweatshirt and comfortable pants. He wasn't like other kids his age, who seemed to feel more comfortable in designer outfits. Malik didn't have luxury clothes, but he had something many didn't have, a dream. His gaze was filled with palpable excitement. He was going to visit his grandmother, a wise and warm woman, in a distant city he had never seen. He had saved every penny for this trip, working odd jobs after school, cleaning neighborhood sidewalks or helping local merchants, exhausting but rewarding tasks. It was his first adventure abroad, and each step seemed like a victory against life's challenges. The flight was long, but he was ready. He didn't fear discomfort or distance. It was his moment. The moment when he would finally leave the routine of his small town, where he would feel for a moment like all those travelers he had seen in the movies, people who had the freedom to travel, to discover the world. Malik's life had always been marked by watching others live their dreams, but today he was finally the one living his. Malik checked in at the airport without incident, took his ticket, and headed to the boarding gate. Everything seemed so smooth. There was a glimmer of optimism in his eyes. After all, he deserved it. He had done everything right. He had proven his determination. After all, he was just a teenager, but he felt like he was finally ready to grasp his place in this big world. Once on board, he looked for his seat, a window seat that he had specially reserved. It was his moment of escape, and he wanted to savor it. He sat comfortably in his seat, taking off his sneakers so he could relax a little, and adjusted his coat on his knees. He closed his eyes for a moment, thinking about his dream coming true, but when he opened them again, reality would manifest itself in a much more brutal way than he had imagined. It was then that an icy voice broke the silence, a voice he was not expecting. "You need to get up, young man," said the flight attendant, Sandra, in a commanding voice, devoid of any warmth. Malik looked up, surprised at first, not knowing exactly why she was talking to him. He hadn't made a mistake. He had followed the instructions well. He stood up immediately, thinking he had made a small mistake in his seat configuration. Perhaps he had misunderstood the instructions. But when he got up, he quickly realized that it wasn't that. This hostess, Sandra, stared at him coldly. His eyes held no trace of kindness, only impatience. "Your seat is ill-adjusted. You will disturb the other passengers. You will have difficulty sitting properly. You will have to change seats." Malik, confused and a little unsettled, tried to answer. "But I'm already well established. I don't understand." But before he could even finish his sentence, she cut him off sharply. "Come with me." He stood up, his heart beating a little faster. What was really going on here? Why this intervention? He felt trapped in a situation that seemed strange and unfair. He still hoped it was a misunderstanding. But as he followed the hostess, she barely glanced at him. She was dragging him towards the exit door of the plane, as if he were nothing but a burden. "This place is too uncomfortable for him," she whispered to another hostess, not even caring about Malik's presence. It was as if she didn't see him as a person, but as just a problem to be solved. Malik, his heart beating harder, protested again. "But I'm ready to settle in. I'm just going to adjust. I'm sorry, I'll do everything I can to." He felt a heat take over his face, a heat that had nothing to do with the temperature of the plane. A shame, a humiliation that he had not anticipated. But before he could even finish his sentence, Sandra turned to him and in a dry, merciless tone replied, "No, it's already too much. You're going to have to leave the plane." The words hit Malik like a slap. There was no space for discussion, no room for humanity. It was a decision made suddenly, without the slightest empathy. The coldness in his voice seemed devoid of any compassion. He felt small, insignificant, like a defective object that was thrown away without even trying to understand. He was just an obstacle in Sandra's system, and that system seemed to have been created to make him disappear. The eyes of the other passengers were fixed on him. Some murmured among themselves, others looked away, embarrassed by the scene unfolding before them. Nobody intervened. No one gave him a chance to explain himself. He had the impression of being invisible to the majority, but at the same time, he bore the enormous weight of the gaze of those who judged him without even knowing him. Sandra called a security guard. Malik, without understanding what was happening to him, was escorted out of the plane, like a criminal being evacuated discreetly. He felt so outside of this world, like a stranger, despite belonging to the same space. The plane door closed behind him with a metallic clang, resounding in his chest like a clap of thunder. He didn't have a chance to say anything. No one tried to understand. It was just another humiliation in a world that seemed to never end. The next morning, Sandra woke up with a heaviness weighing on her heart, a deep unease that settled well beyond the injustice she had inflicted on Malik. As she looked through the reports from the flight, memories of yesterday's events replayed in her head like a movie she couldn't stop. She relives every gesture, every word, and the clarity of her mistakes invades her, stronger than ever. The boy, Malik, had done nothing wrong. It just took a little longer to set up, a mundane thing that should have been fixed in seconds. She realized that she had acted too hastily, ignoring the opportunity to understand, without giving him a chance to explain, to offer him a little patience. It wasn't the first time she had to deal with passengers deemed difficult, people who seemed impatient for often futile reasons. But something about this situation seemed different. A discomfort had set in, more subtle, more insistent. Why had she taken it that way? Why had she let her own judgments trump logic? Thinking back to the way she had treated Malik, she felt terrible embarrassment. This embarrassment was much more than a simple error of judgment. It was a painful realization, a rude awakening to his internal prejudices. Sandra remembered the moment she saw Malik in the queue. A young black man, alone, nervous, with the air of someone who didn't quite fit in, or at least that's what she had thought at the time. Perhaps, subconsciously, she had seen a potential target, a situation she believed she needed to control before it even happened. He's just a lost teenager, she said to herself, a little too loud to be discreet. These furtive thoughts, fueled by stereotypes that took root long before she knew it, had influenced her behavior. But the truth had come to light in a cruel way. Malik was just a teenager, nervous about traveling alone, who just needed a little patience, a listening ear. And she hadn't offered him any of that. She found herself sitting in her hotel room, her eyes staring at the screen of her phone without really seeing what it was showing. She could still hear the echo of the voice of another passenger who had expressed his disavowal, a man who had dared to say out loud what she had not wanted to admit. He said she behaved as if she had judged him for no reason. Another painful truth that forced its way into his mind. She felt ashamed, not only of her actions, but also of the way she had justified them within herself. This shame, she knew, would not dissipate easily. When she got up that morning, she made a decision. Something had to change. It wasn't enough to just tell herself she'd do better next time. She had to fix this mistake, take responsibility for her actions, and come to terms with her own conscience. She immediately called the airline's customer service department, fully intending to find Malik and apologize. She had spent hours searching, navigating protocols, until she finally got his number. When she called Malik, she wasn't ready to hear the anger, frustration, or incomprehension that might have come from his voice. But instead it was a heavy silence, a silence she hadn't anticipated. Malik, on the other end of the line, sounded as shocked as she had been the day before. He responded, his voice trembling, as if the words still escaped him. I didn't understand why you did that to me. I was just there, trying to make things right. She heard him, that confusion in his voice, and it hit her even harder. I know, Malik, she replied softly. And that's why I feel even more guilty. I can't change what I did, but I can change what I do in the future. I apologize for my behavior." There was no anger in his response, only a form of relief, of recognition. "I forgive you," he said after a moment, "but I hope this kind of thing doesn't happen again. Not for me, but for everyone like me who has to face unjust judgments." Those words echoed in Sandra's head long after the call ended. She knew her apology wouldn't erase the pain Malik had felt, but it was a first step toward redeeming her own mistakes. This was where the real work began. After this conversation, Sandra actively looked for solutions. She attended a seminar on managing unconscious bias, a key moment that marked the beginning of her true transformation. She committed to integrating these lessons into her professional life and beyond, ensuring that her colleagues and team members received training to combat the biases that too often dictate people's decisions, even without them realizing it. It was not enough to simply regret your mistakes. You also had to act to prevent them from happening again. This seminar was not simply an awareness, but a call to action. As for Malik, although his journey was marked by unjustified humiliation, he emerged stronger, more determined. The treatment he had suffered would not define him. He had learned not to let the stereotypes of others taint his identity. He knew the world could be harsh, but he wasn't going to let it get him down. His journey had been a rite of passage, an ordeal that, although difficult, had shaped him. Thus, what seemed like a simple injustice turned into a turning point for Sandra, who sought to right her mistake and change the way she interacted with the world, and for Malik, who, with dignity, learned to face a world that was not always fair, but could never erase his value.